Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to September's Mindsight video. Mindsight 2020 has been so good for me this year, and I'm so proud that I have been keeping up with it. And today's word that I had put down back in December was seed. And when I thought of that word and when I was looking over it and taking notes for the purpose of this video, I immediately thought of like the seed cycle. Now, what I was probably going with seed is how I am a seed and we're all a seed no matter what our age is. But it got me immediately thinking about a seed cycle. And what I had said in a previous video about when you're a seed, okay, like when you say you buy a seed packet from the store and you plant it and something grows from that, right? You never really take the time to process the fact that that seed came from another plant that you've never seen before. And I thought, holy shit. You may have had those thoughts before, but I never, when you do certain things like that, hardly you ever sit down and say, wow, that came from another plant, another flower, another sunflower that I've never seen before. I don't even know where that sunflower lives. Is it dead? Is it still cycling through its own cycle? And then that got me on to like ancestors and ancestor veneration and how that's important, especially this time of year. We're coming up on Mabon, which is, for me, the autumnal equinox is my putting the mother to bed and getting the crone out, because I have a triple goddess practice. And what that means is that this autumn equinox coming up will start me on my crone journey for the year. My death devotions, my crone devotion, my hag devotion, and ancestor veneration, ancestor work, ancestor rituals, Samhain. And it got me thinking of all of that. And how if I'm a seed, I came from another whole plant, which is probably, which is my parent, right? Which is a parent. And they came from another one. And how important it is when you think of, when I was talking before about you buying a seed packet, okay? Not even thinking about the sunflower that seed came from, right? Why do we hold such reverence for our ancestors when if we're just buying a seed packet, we hardly ever think of it? Do we? When we're talking about ancestor work, we're talking about past life work. Past lives is something that I work with sometimes as well. Inner child, right? Like just me, I have an inner child. And then the whole me has past lives. And then that has ancestors. Cycles and cycles and cycles spiraling out. I know that I've been reading a lot of spirituality articles and stuff, and it's like psychoanalysis versus spirituality articles lately. And what that got me thinking was there's a lot of people that either get cut from their religion, they cut it themselves, and then they never really get back in touch with the spirituality aspect of, like, they never really reestablish their relationship with the divine, right? And how there's something in our psyche that needs that. Why do we need it? Because we're all interconnected. We remember the time that we were together with the divine. We remember that. And therefore, we're on this loop, right? But somehow we've disconnected it. That's why we feel the disconnect. Right? It got me thinking. I was like, holy shit, this relationship that we have with ourselves is great. As a witch, it's great that I work with my inner child. But then, because I'm still stuck, I'm still in the spiral, when I work with the inner child, I think about a past life. Something will come out in a dream and I'll think about a past life. And then I'll go into the collective unconscious, right? The spiral's getting bigger. I'll get the collective unconscious image will pop out somewhere, and then that'll loop me to the divine, whatever it is to me, until I have expanded my vision into absolute ether, into nothingness, into everything and nothingness. And that was such a profound thought for me. that about spirals and about the labyrinth. I talked about that in a previous Mindsight video, and how when we go on journeys, we may treat ourselves as a seed packet. We think that we're giving ourselves the things that it needs to grow, to sprout, continue to grow, transplant it to a better spot to help its growth, right? Only to become a full-blown plant, and we think that that's the end. We think that we start over here as a seed, and that we're doing all we can to continue the cycle, and then we're done over here. We've been looking at our seed life, our life, as linear, when it's doing this constantly. And we're all connected. Why do we feel the disconnect? Because somewhere along here, we try to do this. Now, I want to talk about a video that I watched, a TED Talk that I watched from a brilliant scientist who often gets on TED and talks about shit, is Tom Chi. And he has this very special thing that he does where he talks about how we're all connected in terms of science, no mysticism, right? And I thought, okay, let me see what this guy has to say, you know? And I was being really cheeky with it, you know, not, because I was thinking there's bound to be some mysticism in here somewhere. Bound to be. Because here I am talking about the spiral, and I'm talking about past lives and ancestor veneration, and how we're collective unconscious, and we're going around this spiral, right? I was being cheeky. And it was so profound to think that there's some science to back up our connectedness. So, I've written some notes down on how Tom Chi says that, how he explained how we're interconnected, okay? And he broke the video, he broke his talk into 3 parts: heart, breath, and mind. And how 3 of them, scientifically speaking, we're all connected, right? So, all right. Now, basically what I'm going to do is I'm summarizing this video. I'm going to leave the link for it below because he explains it very well, and he's kind of funny himself. So go and watch the original video if you want more information, if you really want him to give you like the actual scientific terms, because I'm probably not going to pronounce them right. But in the heart, okay, we're going to start with the heart. In the heart, the heart's job is to move hemoglobin around, right? In the heart of hemoglobin is iron. Right? It's a single iron atom. Well, when we think iron, we think like Earth's crust, right? But the only place that iron forms is out in space. Okay? I think this kind of links to how we're all stars, right? But anyway, there's a single iron atom in the hemoglobin that the heart's moving, which allows the oxygen to move. Okay? Now the iron comes from space. How iron is formed is by a supernova, an explosion, right, out in space. Now what happens with iron out in space is it sits out there like this. It expands, right? Then it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't reform into anything. They're just particles out there in space. The only way that it can blend with something else is by a supergalactic collision, right? With something else. That's how Earth was formed. So if we look at us as this is me as a humanoid, right? Human. I have iron, and then the Earth has iron in its crust. And then iron's out in space, exploding and then mixing with other things when there are supergalactic collisions, and then on and on and on and on and on. That's how we, tiny us, our little tiny dot is connected way out into space. It's crazy. Then breath, okay? Back when Earth was like nothing, right? Not breathable, there's tiny organisms that lived in like rock crevices. They found a way to live on Earth. They adapted, right? They adapted to it. When Earth was formed, it had 0.05% oxygen. It was uninhabitable, right? And somehow these organisms found a way to live in that. Now then what happened is these organisms, we know them as algae. Yeah, that green shit, okay? It was algae that figured out photosynthesis. So uninhabitable Earth, right? And then this algae was living in rock crevices, figured out a way to use the sun, take sunlight and convert it. How they do that? They took sunlight and converted carbon dioxide into oxygen. The land and ocean started sucking up all the oxygen that this algae was creating through photosynthesis, right? Then after 2 billion years of doing this, the land and ocean were just sucking the oxygen up, soaking it up. It took 2 billion more years to begin to accumulate an atmosphere around Earth, created by this algae. So this tiny organism became algae, began to, like, they learned how to live just how they were, tiny organism, and then figured out how to photosynthesize, create oxygen that allows the land and oceans to suck it in. Then what happened, like I said, after 2 billion years, the atmosphere was formed. Then life formed in the sea. And then plant life. And then animal life. Along the life of Earth, plants became smarter and smarter, eating those cellular organisms to sustain themselves. So what does that mean? That's the chain of life, right? The food chain. Other plants and other animals began to realize that they could eat those organisms to sustain themselves. And I love the line in the video where he says, the green that we see in the plants is that plant's ancestor. And I thought, so this tiny algae, this tiny bacteria, right? This tiny organism learned and adapted and grew. And then, by forming oxygen through photosynthesis, an atmosphere was formed, which after, millions of years, plant and animal life began to form. And then they had to, just like the algae, learn and grow on how to sustain themselves. How do they do that? By eating plankton and more algae, eating those and eating that and eating that. And it's like, that's how the plants and animals are connected, right? That's crazy. The green that we see in these plants, in this beautiful leaf, sitting out in your garden, that's the green of its own ancestors. That the cycle it's connected to isn't just its life. It's connected to everything. Going back to the Earth's formation and these tiny organisms. It's just crazy. How our breath, the oxygen that we breathe, is from these plants and animals from billions of years ago. We're not even conscious of it half the time. I think that's why yoga is so important, because it wants us to remember that, how important the breath is. Number 3, our brains, okay? We have lived forever. Us, the atoms that make up ourselves. have existed for billions of years, right? Because when humans were first made, when humans first formed, we had to figure out how to sustain ourselves, and we did that through what? Animals and plants, which connects us back to the algae, okay? So on and so on and so on, up out into nothing. So the atoms that make up us are our ancestors, literally, scientifically. Therefore, when we tap into past lives, we are actually tapping in to the atom's memories. When we make those things conscious, and when we think about them, we're those tiny, tiny microscopic organisms and atoms that make us up are literally billions of years old. And we are remembering it all. And I've touched on this before, that our atoms cycle out, right? Like every 7 years or so, whatever. But he went one step a little bit further with this. He said most of our atoms cycle out every year. We change into someone new every year with our atoms filtering. They filter out. And he used the analogy that the amount of atoms we lose every year is about the size and weight of our one arm. So it's like losing an arm and gaining an arm every year, gaining a new arm or a new body part every year. That's mind-blowing, right? The part of you that was a plant at one point, that was a single cell organism at one point, you've evolved into a multi-structural organism. So the part of you inside, what I'm saying is, the part of you that is inside, that is a tiny organism, single cell, from billions of years ago, lives in here, all right, somewhere. So he went on to say, because we haven't even gotten to the mind portion of this, he's trying to connect it all, hence the purpose of the video. But what happens is we remember all of those things, the things that we were, the organisms that we were. And what happens is our cells and organisms and our ecosystem, what they're doing is it is accumulating into our DNA, our genetics, our behavior. So what does that mean in terms of the brain? The structure of our mind accumulates as a collective consciousness, how we are perceiving reality. Our thoughts and our behaviors are mapping out to be human because we're remembering when we weren't. We're evolving because that's what we are. That's what our purpose is as an organism. Back to a single cellular organism. The whole purpose is sustainability. And how are we doing that? Cycling through. We have to cycle. Cycle through what we were, what we are, what we're gonna be. And I think that was so profound to think about how he was able to scientifically put forth how we are all connected. We're all connected to those single-celled organisms that was on Earth when it was formed. And how the that organism, that bacteria formed into algae, which formed into an atmosphere, formed into oxygen, which formed into an atmosphere, which formed into plants and animal life, and then human life, right? Kind of like, I see that like as an oval. Oval, 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 oval. Think of the middle of an egg, hard boiled. That's the thing I go to. Is that the me that is the white of the egg has a yellow in it. And the yellow is all of it. My past lives. All the way back until I was the green of the algae. Until I was nothing but bacteria living in a rock crevice. Back until I was floating in space. colliding with something else. Now for the activity of this video, I'm going to draw a picture. Like I'll probably put the camera face down or something, and I want to draw a picture of the seed cycle and talk about it for a second. And so I'll see you in a minute. So what I wanted to do was just like kind of give you a rough sketch of a seed cycle. As this has been how I guess in doing this video and in thinking about the activity, I was really thinking about drawing this in a way that was healing, and it really has been helping. Okay, so we have this plant, okay, and this is going to be primitively drawn, okay? It's not going to be perfect. All right, primitively drawn. And this, what I'm doing here is I'm going to give you the, I guess, the analogy of a sunflower life. Okay, this is dirt. Okay, we have this beautiful sunflower here. With lovely seeds everywhere in the center. All those lovely seeds. There. Now we have this lovely sunflower here that just seems to be floating here. But what I want to do is I want to write a word here. Parent. It's your parent, right? Now what happens at the end of this parent cycle is this withers and it sheds seeds because it's a self-seeding plant, right? Now what happens here is this figure over here doesn't do anything to this seed. It gets buried. Now I want you to think that this is like underground. It gets buried by some unnatural force, or maybe it's buried by self. Buried by self, right? Then as a form of sustainability, it knows how to use, okay, right here, it learns how to use what? How to use rain, and sunlight for sustainability, right? Well, then what happens is the seed kind of cracks open a little bit and sprouts, right? As part of growth. So after it's learned, it starts to grow. Then, after it's grown a little bit, it's formed roots as a way to grow. It has learned, again, how to sustain itself through roots, through a root system. So it grew. So it grew into something that looks like its parent, right? And it has its own little petals and its own little center of seeds. right? Continues to grow until such time, and there's one more here, that nothing of the seed seemingly remains. It's nothing but the whole you. Whole brilliance of you. Grown up. Has learned and grew and knew everything about how to sustain itself as its own sunflower. Right? Let me go over these leaves. So I don't know if the yellow is showing up on here. Like I said, it's primitive, quick. Well, then there's, again, room for one more year. Now what happens? At the end of this cycle, it withers, right? The you that was so healthy withers and sheds its seeds, right? But I'm going to draw something really profound here. Is that in terms of a plant cycle, timelines, linear, right? Whoops, sorry, read the wrong word. It does this in the fall. It sheds this in the fall, right? And then you shed in the fall. 1 year. Think about that for a second. It takes this plant a year to get through its a whole cycle, right? But what I noticed was that the parent over here, this thing that birthed you or whatever, and how you learned without its help. I'm not saying you don't need your parents. I'm just saying in terms of seed and cycles, we look at this in a linear way. We think about this in a linear way. And we think about the self growing and learning, becoming the whole self. Here, I'll even write whole self here. Whatever that means, okay? You've had a self-care practice. You've learned and learned and learned and learned. And you keep learning. The whole self doesn't mean that you stop learning. And then you wither and die over here, right? And then, what do you become? You started over. The self is over here now. But this is only 1 year. And in what we were talking about before, what if this happens every year of our life? What if we're remembering the parent of the algae that we were, the self we were in a past life, the ancestor that first learned about water and the sunlight? We're remembering the algae evolving into and sustaining themselves through photosynthesis. When we go out and catch sun rays, somewhere in our body, in the atoms that make us up, we're remembering that. We remember how to grow. It's something that we do innately. We learn and we grow and we wither and we die. Not in 1 year, but on forever. In this spiral of time. Does the parent have a place in your growth? What would the roots be here? What would the roots be in your life? Is it your location, your home? Does that play a role in the whole you? Is that your root systems and what that may mean? What are your seeds? Are these your ideas? Are these your mindsets? Are these people? Or what are the things that you've generated to aid future generations? What have you put forth that future generations will be remembering in their atoms. Think on your cycles and think of yourself as a spiral, not a line. Hope that this is the first time I drew in Mindsight, so I really enjoyed this. That's the activity for today and for this month's Mindsight. Come back next new moon for some more Mindsight love.